Well, what a great day this is. The 500th anniversary of the Reformation, Martin Luther's remarkable moment that changed history forever. And coincidentally, I didn't really plan it this way. Originally, coincidentally, I'm going to be preaching a 4-sermon series on the vows of the church. And I've been teasing you about this a little bit. After 4 decades, I'm admitting that I don't much care for the United Methodist vows that we give to the church. Most of you have received this vow. I'm going to put it up here on the screen. We're going to read it for you. Will you be loyal to the United Methodist Church and support it with your prayers, presence, gifts, service, and witness? I don't know about you. To me, that sounds just kind of like an institutional loyalty vow, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But we're going to preach 4 sermons on 4 out of 5 of these. Believe it or not, it's stewardship time. We're going to talk about the budget a little bit and about the importance of supporting the ministry of the church, but I'm not going to preach a sermon on money. I'm going to preach one on presence, service, witness, and prayers. And today the sermon is on presence. I will say to you that I really think that if we get that part right, we're going to talk about a new way of thinking about our presence in the life of the church and our presence as disciples in the life of the world. I think if we get that part right, we don't even need the other vows. They all kind of come naturally. But today on presence, and we're going to turn to the Gospel of Mark in the 14th chapter. Mark and Matthew both tell this story almost identically. It's at the end of the life of Jesus. He's in Jerusalem. He's about to be arrested and go to the cross. He goes to the Garden of Gethsemane. How many of you have been to the Garden of Gethsemane? I was there in 1979. It's a very powerful place to be, to know you're right there where Jesus prayed the last night of his life. And he invites 3 of his disciples to come further with him and be right there with him as he prays. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." And he took with him Peter and James and John, and he began to be distressed and agitated. And he said to them, "I am deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and keep awake." That's his only instruction. Remain here, please keep awake. And going a little farther, he threw himself on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, this hour might pass from him. He said, "Abba, Father, for you all things are possible. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I want, but what you want." He came and he found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, you can hear the disappointment in his voice. He said to Peter, "Simon, are you asleep? Could you not keep awake just 1 hour? Keep awake and pray that you may not come into the time of trial. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." And again he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And once more he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy, and they did not know what to say to him. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. A number of years ago, I don't remember exactly when this was, but I remember we were in the first sanctuary in this location, what we now call Trinity Hall. We had the worship service. I preached a sermon. At the end, we opened the doors of the church, and we invited new members to come down. A family of 4 came down, a mother, a father, a young daughter, and an even younger son. And I remember distinctly giving them the vows of the church, the ones we read a moment ago. Will you be loyal to the United Methodist Church and support it with your prayers, your presence, your gifts, your service, and your witness? The mother and the father dutifully said, "I will." But little Brandon, who was about 7 at the time, shouted over them both, saying, "I'll do the best I can." Well, of course, little Brandon got it right. What else could you say to vows like that? Will you be loyal to the church to support with your prayers, presence, gift, service, and witness? What does that mean? I'm never going to miss a worship service? You know, he actually had the right answer. I'll do the best I can. My good friend, Dr. James Moore, fairly well-known pastor and author of a number of books, was here on that particular day, and that story ended up in the next book he wrote. Well, what does it mean when we take the vows of church membership? I'll have to say to you, I do not like the vows we have. It sounds more like a one-way deal, that we owe everything to the church and the church doesn't owe anything to us. It sounds just like the word we use. It sounds like a loyalty oath. And so I have rewritten the vows of church membership. And I'm going to show them to you here. I will say to you that I haven't run this past the bishop yet. So I don't know, when he finds out, he may excommunicate me. That would be the only thing I have in common with Martin Luther. I feel pretty sure that our bishop would like these vows better as well. Rather than saying, will you be loyal? Here's what we're really going for, I think, in the vows of church membership in terms of helping us to grow on our spiritual journey. Will you remain engaged in the ministries of the church? Will you remain engaged, that word engaged, in the ministries of the church and continue to grow spiritually by being generous with your prayers, presence, gifts, service, and witness? And in my conception of these vows, it means it's a two-way street. We make a commitment to remain engaged in ministry and to grow, and the church remains committed to us to help us do so, especially with these guideposts. And this understanding of the vow, presence, gifts, service, witness, prayers, become the guideposts by which we grow deeper and deeper in our discipleship journey, and have more profound commitment to what it means to follow Jesus. How do you like these vows better, don't you? They're better. I think they are. So this morning we're going to talk about presence. What does it mean to say, I'm going to remain engaged in the ministry of the church and support it generously with my presence? I think, honestly, if we get that part right, you don't even need any of the other vows. Once we learn how to support the ministries of the church with our presence properly understood, then everything else, prayers, witness, gifts, service, all of that comes along with it. We're going to be talking about those other vows in the next few weeks, but I think you'll see that they really all grow out of this understanding of presence. Now, most of the time when we talk about supporting the church with our presence, what we're really thinking of is our attendance, aren't we? And there's nothing wrong with that. That's as it should be. A number of years ago, I belonged to the Rotary Club. If you belong to the Rotary Club, they're going to ask you before you join. They're going to say, look, we expect you to have perfect attendance. If you miss our Rotary Club, you can make it out up in another Rotary Club. I guess that's the way it still works. It makes sense. We want you to support the Rotary Club with your dues and with your attendance. Some of you serve, as I have on many occasions, on some board of an organization, maybe a charitable organization. And almost always, before they invite you to become a part of that board, somebody's going to take you out, the chairman of the board maybe, or the CEO of that organization. They're going to take you to lunch maybe, or to coffee, and say, look, we're thinking about, we'd like for you to be a part and have a leadership role on our board of directors. But this is what we want from you. We want you to be in attendance. When the board meets, we want you to be there. There might be an occasion when you're sick or out of town, but nevertheless, most of the time we want you to be there. Not only that, they're going to say, and not only that, but we want you to support our organization with your money and your time. And we'd like you to support our organization by helping to raise money from others. Those are all important and reasonable commitments we make in our organizational life with one another. And so it makes sense, on the one hand, that we say, I'll support the church with my attendance. And sometimes it can be life-changing. My wife, Bobby, when she was a senior in high school, had a huge fight with her mother. It was her senior year. She was at home on the weekend with the flu. I think she was running 104 or 5 degrees of fever. And her mother wouldn't allow her to attend church. Now, I hope you heard that right. In my family, if we went on vacation, I said, do we have to go to Sunday school, when we're our grandparents? With Bobby, it was just the opposite. From the time she started Sunday school at the age of 5, she had attended church every single Sunday, 52 Sundays out of the year. If they went to her grandparents down in Kearns, Texas, she went to her grandparents' church, and she attended Sunday school and church. She had never missed. She had a perfect record going. And she was bitterly upset with her mother. Now, my wife is a strong-willed woman, and she wins most of the arguments. But Marion, who's long gone, so I can say this now, I don't know, I may get haunted. Marion was even a stronger-willed woman, and she won the argument. Bobby didn't get to go to church that day, broke her perfect record. But when we think about a commitment like that, that's life-changing, isn't it? It forms us and changes us in important and truly important ways. I preached a sermon a few months ago in which I referenced this book that I've read, such a powerful book, by Jamie Smith called You Are What You Love. And in that book, he talks about the fact that we really become what we practice in life. And he makes a huge commitment. He asks for a huge commitment to go into worship. He says, look, there really is no substitute for being in worship and being formed by the prayers and the liturgies and the music and the sermons of the church. I believe that it's really important. Having said that, I really think if that's the only way in which we think about this vow in terms of being present to God, we're really missing the profound depth that can be present in this vow. Because what I really think we are saying when we say, will you remain engaged in the ministries of the church and grow generously with your presence, it's not just a matter of attendance in the church. It's a matter of being present to God and allowing God being present to you during all of your life. We're talking about your worship life in the sanctuary, but we're also talking about your family life and your life at work and your social life and your civic life. If you are what you practice, then allowing God to be present to you at all times is much deeper and more profound than simply being in attendance. That's why I thought about this particular text today. The story of Jesus going to the cross is an extraordinary one. In this passage, fairly famous, Mark and Matthew both tell it. Jesus knows he's in the final hours of his life. Whenever you read about Jesus praying, other than teaching the disciples how to pray the Lord's Prayer, when you read about Jesus praying in the New Testament, he is always praying by himself. The gospel writers will say he went to a lonely place, or that he went to a place that is solitary. He was always praying by himself. On this occasion, it's such an extraordinary moment because he goes halfway up Gethsemane, he leaves the rest of the disciples there, and he calls the three disciples, Peter, James, and John. He says, I want you to come all the way with me. And there he prays, and he says, just stay awake with me. And you heard the story a minute ago. The disciples could not stay awake. You see, the point is that they were in attendance, but they were not engaged. They were present, physically present with Jesus, but they were not spiritually present. And Jesus says, can't you just stay awake for a few moments? Now, this is about a lot more than the fact that some of you fall asleep during the sermons. I mean, some of you have that problem. You think I don't see, but I do. Jesus is wanting the disciples to be awake and engaged with him in the most powerful spiritual moments of his life. And so when we stop and think about the difference between being engaged and just being in attendance, you can think about some of those moments in your own life when you knew that this is a holy moment. I think about March 5th, 1981, 8 o'clock in the morning, Wichita Falls General Hospital. My wife was in the labor and delivery room. I barely got there, but I did get there. And I saw life coming into the world. And it was a holy and powerful moment. Creation unfolding before my very eyes. And trust me, it was more than just being in attendance. I was engaged. Some of you have had the experience that I've had, and that is being present during the final days of your mother's life or your father's life. And if you've been there, you know that that time is important and it is holy. It's mysterious, somewhat painful, but also the deep and profound knowledge that this is about life and life everlasting, trusting a loved one to go from your view, trusting that they go with God. I think that's what Jesus was talking about when he said to the disciples, can't you stay with me? Can't you stay engaged? It's a lot more than just being in attendance. It's recognizing the power of what takes place in life and in our lives and in the life of the world when we are truly with Jesus, when we're truly following Jesus, when we are truly motivated by a relationship with Christ. Several weeks ago, I preached a sermon on Martha and Mary. I was talking about how Martha had a type A personality. This is one of my favorite stories in the New Testament, and you can preach it in so many ways. As I was working on this sermon, I thought of a new way of thinking about the story about Martha and Mary. You may not remember the story. Here it is. The two sisters, Martha and Mary, have invited Jesus into their home. And let's just say that the division of labor has not been very fair on this particular day. Jesus is there, but Martha's back there in the kitchen. She's washing the dishes. She's fixing the dessert. She's vacuuming. She's doing all these chores because it's important for her to be a good hostess. Mary, on the other hand, is in the living room. Jesus is sitting on the divan, the couch. I give up my age when I say the divan. It's a couch for those of you that don't know. Jesus is sitting on the couch and Mary's on the floor at his knees, and she's just sitting there listening to him. And Martha gets really upset. She comes into the room and she's very irritated with Mary. And she said, Mary, look, I'm doing all the washing and the cleaning and all the chores. And she turns to Jesus and she says, Jesus, won't you make her come into the kitchen and help me? And Jesus immediately and clearly says, Mary has chosen the better part. You see, I wonder, in terms of this issue about the vow of presence, being present to God, I wonder what it is that Jesus might say to you and me if Jesus were up here today. I think he might say, look, I know you're here in attendance today, but that's not enough. I want more. This is what happens to you. And he'd turn to me and he'd say, Don, this is what happens to you as well. You come to church, you listen to the sermon, you sing the music, you pray the prayers, but then you go home and you get busy, busy, busy. You get distracted by all the details of life. You go to work and you get all stressed out. Even in your engagements, in your social life, in your civic life. You fall asleep. You fall asleep. You forget about me. When I say, I want you to be engaged in the ministries of the church and be loyal and growing with your presence, I'm not just talking about Sunday morning. I'm talking about being present all the time, allowing God to be present in your life and being God's presence in the lives of others. Prayers, service, witness. We'll talk about that. This is the profound meaning of supporting the work of the church with your presence. I didn't plan it this way, but here we are, the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. Martin Luther sensed that the church was sinking into trivialities, and it was. And he tacked up the 95 Theses, and he says, now it's a new day. Because now it's not about institutional loyalty. It's about following Jesus, letting Jesus be present and transformational in our lives all the time, all the time. And I think about the world in which we live today, our culture coming apart, and I think maybe it's time for one of those moments again. Maybe it's time for us to take seriously what it means to be present to God and to be engaged in the ministries of the church. Maybe it's time for a revival.